Morning. I trust you all well. You could have heard the chat in the background. We have a live person that will be posing a question. I hope you're all doing well, and thank you for joining the webinar. Last week was a short week. This week, obviously, we have more time to do what we have to do. So let's get into it immediately. Please note that you're welcome to post questions via the Zoom platform live. The details are on the screen, whereby a link will be sent to you with the Zoom details, and obviously you can interact with me live. Somebody will be doing it shortly. Alternatively, you can make use of Facebook Live, the Advocate Mohammed Abduroaf Facebook page, whereby you pose your question while typing it in live as well. And obviously, the normal way would be sending the question via our platforms, whereby you register the question, I'll deal with it, and of course, you still have the option of joining us live. Okay, the first question. Interesting question, and I would actually prefer the person that posed the question just to assist me a bit with this. And obviously, I'll be trying my best to answer the question. Let me just close this window here, and that's it. Okay. The first question from Gauteng, it goes as follows. I have a sleep-in domestic worker from Lesotho and pay her 2,500 rand per month, I presume. She's looking after my 3 minor children. When the maintenance officer did the calculations, for example, rent, groceries, horse, etc., she also calculated her. Okay. My argument was that whether domestic worker stays with us or not, accommodation must still be paid. How can I want a domestic worker to pay whereas she is getting less money? Because that's where I'm actually stucking on. I'm not understanding the question. Well, is a maintenance officer stipulating that he is deducting your maintenance, your cost, the cost of the domestic worker, or is the maintenance officer stipulating the domestic worker is living on your premises, and therefore the domestic worker should pay rental towards you, or you should deduct that rental from a salary, and so on. So I'm not very much understanding that part of the question. Okay, my question is that is that right for the officer to include domestic worker on the expenses? I do not understand how he or she is including the domestic worker in the expenses. Is it deducting, adding on, whatever the case may be? I have a good relationship with the domestic worker. So the caller, the questioner, if you can maybe unmute your microphone, maybe just get more into detail regarding this. What are we dealing here with? Is the maintenance officer stipulating, okay, the father must pay 1,000 and maintenance, for example, but he must pay less because the maintenance officer must also contribute towards the household expenditure? Can you maybe give us some clarity, and I'll deal with it properly?
Okay, good morning, everyone. The question was like when they do the expenses, I write the child expenses on the list there. When they did the calculation for the household expenditures, they wanted to include her. Let's say maybe if I buy a grocery for 1,000 rand, and then they said that an adult is 2, and then the domestic worker is going to be 2, and then with my 3 kids, 1, 2, 3, that means the total, when they get it there for the total expenses, they're going to divide it by 7. They calculating the domestic worker on the expenses for the household. When they do the maintenance, they take out the portion for me and the domestic worker on the side, and they also put the children's ones on the side. I wasn't sure whether is it fair to include her on the expenses because she's living with us in the same premises.
Yes, I'm
Yes.
with you. So maybe I can maybe just jump in here quickly. So the principle basically is in a maintenance case, however you unpack your expenditure, whatever way you unpack it, the ultimate goal is to get the other side to contribute his or her portion towards the household expenditure. So if the domestic worker is providing a service for the minor children, and then obviously the father has an obligation to contribute towards that specific portion. But for argument's sake, let's say, for example, your rental for the month is 1,000 rand per month. Now the domestic worker also lives in a premises, and you of course live in a premises, and there are 3 kids involved. you must determine only what the portion of the children are. So I disagree. I do not follow the principle whereby the two-thirds, the one-third, and all that. That is more very confusing. It is not realistic. So
Yes.
if the child, if you take this, if you work it out this way, if you had a home and there's 5 bedrooms, I'm using the silly example because there are 5 people in your home. There's five bedrooms, and because there's a domestic worker in the home, automatically now you have to have 5 bedrooms. But had you not had a domestic worker, you'd have 4 bedrooms. So there's a value associated with the domestic worker working there. So the father does not necessarily have an obligation to provide the domestic worker with accommodation. So it's difficult for me to stipulate whether or not the maintenance officer was right or wrong, but the bottom line is the maintenance officer must look at the matter from a point of view whereby what contribution should the father make towards the expenditure of the kids? Is the accommodation for the minor children X? For argument's sake, let's say your rental or your bond is 1,000 per month. What portion are the minor children using of that? And then based upon that, the court will have to determine what portion must the father pay towards that. I hope you're with me where that is concerned, but I don't agree with the two-third, one-third exam, you know, practice which a maintenance officers work. It's impractical. It doesn't make logical sense to me.
Yes,
You need to,
I get it.
you know what I mean? Unless you want me to elaborate a bit further on the specific point, you're welcome to ask me more questions if you have.
Okay. Because when they deduct it with two portions, it's taking the money so low.
Yes, it doesn't
And
make sense. And for the sole
yeah,
reason, see, I'm certain if you had to be a single lady, for argument's sake, and you had no kids and you had no domestic worker, you would have a much smaller apartment. For example, let's say your household, your rental, for argument's sake, let's say it's rental here, comes to 1,000 per month now with the domestic and the 3 kids. But had you been living alone, you must probably got in a place of 300 per month. But because you have three
yes,
kids,
it's
you have
true.
to now spend an additional 700 rand for the 3 kids. That 700 rand must
Mm,
be split between you and the father. And I do not really
yes.
understand why the domestic courts, complicate matters so much. It's simple. The father has an obligation
Mm,
to maintain the kids. What does the kids cost? And you do not work costs based upon a two-thirds and a one-third. That doesn't make logical sense because you can have a
mm,
household with a two-bedroom household where the kids are using only exactly half the household, and you work out a two-third, one-third. Although the mother is using half and the kids are using half. Sorry, but here you calculate it on the kids only using one-third. There's no logic in that. So you need to
mm,
explain to the maintenance officer, or at least try to convince the maintenance officer, telling the maintenance officer, this is the logic behind it. Had I not had a domestic worker and
mm,
children, I would have lived in a home that would cost so much money. But because I have kids, I have to
mm,
provide for them. They cost so much money. Okay, but I have a domestic worker. But the domestic worker is here for the children. And
yes.
50% of the time the domestic worker is here is for the kids. Therefore, the father has to contribute towards the domestic worker's accommodation, 50%, okay, a
Yes.
portion of the 50%, and a portion of the domestic worker's income. Salary, where I'm going to. So it's not that very
Mm,
difficult, but it needs to be unpacked. So we do not confuse
mm,
this whole thing with two-thirds, one-thirds, because I get confused myself, and I'm dealing with it almost for 20 years. It doesn't make logical
mm.
sense to me. Okay.
Because my argument was also like, for example, let's say this domestic worker was not sleeping in. She was coming in the morning and going out. The accommodation will still be there. There's no half, there's nothing. The accommodation will still be need to be paid in full.
Yes, I think now I'm following you. You're 100% right. For example, um, uh, if you have a home, 3 bedroom house, you and your 2 children, for argument's sake, let's say have a room. Now you bring a domestic worker in. A domestic worker sleeps in the living room, for argument's sake. You can't. It doesn't
Yes.
make logical sense to apportion the domestic worker. Because
Mm,
you'd have still had a 2 bedroom home, and tomorrow the domestic worker leaves, you still still dealing with the same situation where you are.
yes.
The Of course, you can argue that there's a need to have a domestic worker, and the domestic worker obviously has certain costs. I mean, because the domestic worker is living there, she uses water, electricity, and so on. And the father has, and if the domestic worker is used to care for the kids, for example, cleaning the room and etc., And half the time she cares for your part of the house for you, like does your whatever she does for you, and half the time she does it for the kids. Then that half must be shared between the father and you. But you're 100% right. Whether or not there was a
Mm.
domestic worker living with you or not, that wouldn't have made a difference. It's almost like they're saying, okay, then let the domestic worker leave, live somewhere else. It makes no difference.
Mm.
Like if she lives somewhere else, the maintenance will be so much. If she lives inside the house and sleeps in that room, the maintenance will be so much. So the maintenance officer is
Mm.
obviously not using his brains or her
Mm.
brains.
Okay. Yeah. Okay. It was just a little bit of my confusion.
I think that the bottom line is you need to just unpack it for them. Sometimes as maintenance officers, they cannot see the whole picture. They maybe deal with a lot of different households. Some households where they intentionally get an additional room for a domestic worker. They intentionally buy certain stuff for a domestic worker, and now they compartmentalize every household with a domestic worker in the same box. It doesn't make sense.
Mm.
They
Yes.
need to unpack your specific case with your specific facts, and deal with it accordingly. So maybe the best thing to do is outline it to them in a spreadsheet. This is how
Yes.
much my bond is, my rental is, whatever the case may be. Whether the domestic worker living here or not living here is exactly the same amount of money I'll spend per month. Therefore, it
Yes.
shouldn't be considered.
Yes.
Okay. I hope you all the best.
Yeah. Thanks.
You're welcome. You're welcome. And
Thank you
thank you
so
for your
much.
time. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. Bye bye. Okay, that was question number one, and thank you very much for the questioner for posing that specific question. Much appreciated. Okay, question number two from the Western Cape. Let me just have a look at our Facebook Live. I need to keep an eye on that as well. If you have any questions via Facebook Live, please feel free to pose it, and I shall deal with that. Okay, question number two. Good day. I have applied for divorce since June 2017. That's 4 years ago, more than 4 years ago. The husband keeps delaying and changing attorneys. He has not paid maintenance since 2017. We are married income into property, and I moved out in March 2017 and is renting property. He is still living in the house. All 4 years ago, these things happened. He never paid maintenance for the last 4 years. Is there any way the divorce can be sped up as the matter is registered with the Western Cape High Court? He does not pay maintenance nor pay half the children's education expenditure. Can I proceed without him? Okay, so there's a divorce. I presume it's a contested divorce. The husband is opposing it, but he's delaying it. He's changing lawyers all the time. That is an unfortunate thing. But remember, in the High Court at least, and I can vouch for the Western Cape High Court, no, there's no reason why things must be delayed. There's case management. There's things that are in place to expedite the finalization of a divorce matter. And 4 years is quite a long time. In all honesty, 4 years is extremely long. The divorce should have been finalized long ago. However, I do not know what your attorneys are doing. Your attorneys should know what they can do and to expedite it. There is something called, in terms of the High Court rules, Rule 43, whereby you can obtain interim maintenance pending the finalization of the divorce and also to deal with care and contact and so on. My advice to you is speak to your attorney about the possibility of making an application in terms of Rule 43 of the High Court rules for interim maintenance going forward and also contribution towards legal costs as well. That's also possible. But at the same time, there are internal structures, case management to assist in the finalization and speeding of divorce proceedings. There is no need for this divorce to be taking so long. It should have been finalized by 2019 for the latest, before COVID-19, seeing that you apply for divorce in 2017. Okay, I hope that assists you with that specific question is concerned. The third question is from Gauteng. Deceased parent's mother was pregnant at the time of father's demise. Department of Home Affairs issued a breach birth certificate with no details of the father. Child has mother's surname and not father's. Parents married in terms of Islamic law. Please provide on advice on how to correct and get a UBC. I think it's an unabridged birth certificate. Okay, I'm a bit confused here. Deceased parent mother. Did the mother pass away? The father passed away? The father's demise also. So I would presume the question here is how can we, at the end of the day, get the child's father's surname on the unabridged birth certificate? But it seems to me the father passed away. So who has a right here? I do not know who is posing this question. Um, the father passed away. He was a co-holder of parental rights and responsibilities. I do not think we can do anything much. The mother, maybe she can approach the Department of Home Affairs and ask them to get a new birth certificate with the father's details on. That is possible. I cannot see that being hard to obtain. But the second question is, if you are a third party, if you are the grandmother, if you are the sister of the deceased, can you approach the court for the child to have birth certificate to have your brother or your son's name on it? I do not think what will be the benefit for you. Who will benefit? Is it the child's best interest? It's the mother that has to ensure that the child's best interest is upheld. It's a technical one, it's a difficult one. It's maybe possible going to the High Court, but I cannot see what benefit there would be in making such an application if you are a third party. If you are the mother, yes, maybe then you can, but it might complicate matters further because they'll keep on asking you, I see you as your father, this person is on the birth certificate. Very easy. Now you must explain all the time he's deceased. Maybe it's best to leave the person's name off. I do not know. That's up to you at the end of the day. And the fourth and last question from the Western Cape. Thank you, Western Cape, for joining in again. My son is 17 years old and he wants to live with my sister in the United Kingdom. He would like to study there and finish school. He has a British passport. Okay, so the child is 17, turning 18 soon, or would be turning 18 at some point in less than 365 days. He is a British citizen, but the father does not want to consent for the minor child to relocate. Difficult one, extremely difficult one. The reason why I'm saying so is, if the mother said, I would like to relocate with my child to the United Kingdom for a better life for my child, X, Y, and Z, the question would be easily be answered because the child is going with the mother. Here we have a scenario whereby the mother is saying, okay, more than likely I'm staying here in South Africa in the Western Cape, the father is in the Western Cape, I presume, but the child needs to go alone to the United Kingdom, but to be cared for by a third party, the aunt. Yes, the court can deal with this matter. The court will obviously have to make a decision as to what is in the minor child's best interest under these circumstances. Is it better for the minor child to go to the United Kingdom by cared for by a third party, the aunt, because he is a British citizen and he can benefit from that? That is for the court to determine. But however, on the flip side, depending upon when the child turns 18 years old, this is going to be important because if the child turns 18 years old in the next 2, 3, 4 months' time, I would say a High Court application will be a waste of time because once the child turns 18 years old, the child can decide whether or not he or she wants to relocate to the United Kingdom or not, because then the child becomes an adult. So parental consent is out of the window. Okay, I hope that assists everyone. Thank you very much for joining and watching this webinar. Please note that our topic for the rest of the week would be relocation issues, passport consent, school consent, more of the issue concerning consent. The reason why we are dealing with that theme going towards the end of the year, because those are the issues which we are coming across much more. People wanting to relocate overseas, parents not consenting to school changes, passport applications, children leaving one school and going to a different school, etc. So those are the issues which we are dealing with now a lot, and I would like to educate our listeners where that is concerned. Thank you very much for your time, and I hope to see you online tomorrow again.